Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar, and the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, Camilla Turner. Welcome to both of you, with us from now until just before midnight. So, front pages then, let us kick off with the Metro. It leads with the fallout after a serving Met Police officer, David Carrick, admitted committing 49 offences, including 24 counts of rape. That story, also the lead, as you can see, for The Guardian. A Met officer admits to a brutal campaign of terror. The Sun pictures Carrick in uniform, describing him as the monster of the Met. The Express asking the big question, how did the Met Police miss a serial rapist in its ranks? The Daily Mirror says that the force had 9 chances to stop Carrick, but failed to act every time. The Telegraph quoting the Met Commissioner admitting that his force failed and that Carrick should never have been one of its officers. Another big question, how many more? The Eye reporting that around 800 Met officers are currently under investigation for alleged sexual or domestic abuse. The Daily Mail puts that figure at closer to 1,600. The Times, meanwhile, focusing on the new round of teacher strikes that have been announced, saying they will hit millions of pupils. The Financial Times has word of a pricing dispute involving US drug manufacturers who supply to the National Health Service. And the Daily Star has details of the arrest of a leading Italian mafia boss. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So let's head straight to our guests then, Pippa Crerar and Camilla Turner. Welcome, as I said, to both of you. Huge, one story dominating, Pippa, that of the Met officer and your paper suggesting, admitted to this brutal campaign of rape and terror over so many years.
That's the astonishing thing about this, is that this man is one of Britain's most serious sex offenders, and yet he was a police officer, and not just any police officer. He was part of an elite unit that was protecting Parliament, diplomats and senior politicians. He was armed, and he used the courts had heard. He used his position when it came to, first of all, getting a loan with women, and then subsequently convincing them that that if they didn't do what he said, then who would believe them when up against a member of an elite police unit. And it's the length of time and the number of women that were affected by this. There was 85 serious offences over 17 years, including 48 rapes. And not just that, I think the thing which most people will be concerned about tonight is obviously the horrors of this particular individual and the sort of the violence and fear that he's spread, but also the fact that the Met ignored warnings on 8 occasions about his behaviour over that 20-year period. And as the seriousness, severity of his crimes escalated, he managed to evade a whole host of points where they could have worked out what was going on and acted on some of during vetting processes and so on. They could have acted on some of the allegations. And it is astonishing. And frankly, Number 10 said earlier today that it was going to shatter public confidence in the police, which is already, as we all know, the Metropolitan Force had a whole series of difficult incidents over the past few years. Public trust in the police is very low. This is going to really make it a whole lot harder for them to win back the trust, despite Mark Rowley's attempts. It's really at a major crisis point.
Yes, and the newspapers will no doubt go into all of these incidents where he could have been caught. You said 8, the Mirror there I think says 9, doesn't it? But your paper, The Guardian, suggesting they've obtained the first account from a woman who says the firearms officer sent her selfies from work in his uniform, some showing his Met-issue gun, and later threatened to murder her, saying, "I can kill you without leaving any evidence." She claimed that he restrained her with his police-issue handcuffs and boasted that he was a powerful man who guarded the Prime Minister. I mean, in a senior role there, as you can see the picture of The Guardian there, David Carrick being promoted to an elite armed unit of the Metropolitan Police in 2009. So, you know, will there be an investigation into these missed opportunities, do you think, Camilla, which should ring alarm bells, no doubt, within the force?
Yes, we've certainly had calls today from politicians for a wide-ranging inquiry to be carried out into the Met Police about why it is that over the last 2 decades they've missed so many warnings about one of the UK's most prolific serial rapists who came from within their own ranks. And Conservative MPs I was speaking to today were saying, how can the public possibly have confidence in the Met Police to solve these crimes in the country when they can't even spot it or even worse, failed to act on multiple red flags of someone from within their own force. So I think this is something that we're going to see a lot of fallout over the coming days. And I think even more calls for senior members of the Met Police to be held for account for any failings and any missed warnings that they've had over the years about this policeman.
Well, the newish, if I can put it that, Commissioner of the Met, Sir Mark Rowley, took over in September, is quoted in the Daily Telegraph for saying, this man abused women in the most disgusting manner. We have failed. But also the paper points out that he previously held the role of Assistant Commissioner for Specialist Operations at the Met, which Carrick's unit came under. So, you know, presumably there won't be direct questions to him, but there are lots of questions now about whether there should be mandatory vetting of all officers in the Met, or indeed, I think, as Labour suggested, Pippa, throughout the country.
Yes, because all the focus is on the Metropolitan Police here as a result of David Carrick. But there, of course, we've seen examples of abuse and misogyny, racism at forces right across the country, which have all helped sully the police's name. And you know, I do think it is worth saying that despite this horrific case, there are masses of police officers out there who do an incredible job on not much money and go way beyond the call of duty to keep the public safe. And we've all encountered them in our everydays. And it is incredibly worrying that this man got away in this force with this for so long. And it suggests that it's not just as simple as senior police officers turning around and say this is one bad apple, that there are some institutional failings here that have let him slip through the net and continue on this, committing these crimes. Many of which were in London, but also some of them which were in Hertfordshire, which is where he lived, and seems to have and has got away, had got away with until this point. And as Camilla says, there are various calls from politicians to conduct an inquiry into how this happened. The Met is no stranger to these sorts of inquiries. It's brought in some recent changes, including one on the police dismissal process, which is the Home Office. We're expecting to hear more from that shortly. And you can only imagine that the forensic eye that has already been cast over the Met will only intensify after this. Mark Rowley, as he said, has just taken over 5 months ago. Departure of Cressida Dick after London Mayor Sadiq Khan lost faith in her. Mark Rowley's taken over. He's a very experienced police officer, but I think even he recognises, it says on the front page of the Telegraph there, that apologies aren't really going to cut it at the moment when it comes back to restoring faith, particularly with women who live in the Metropolitan Police area. And I think it is, I said it was sort of a crisis for policing, and unfortunately I think that's true, and that won't just be restricted to the Met. I think there's a huge amount of work that they're going to have to undertake over probably a very long period to convince a lot of people that as a force they're prepared and willing to root out this sort of behaviour where it exists.
Yes, and a stark front page from the Daily Mail just on this, just how many more monsters in uniform, suggesting that the Met said it was now reviewing 1,633 cases involving 1,071 of its officers and staff who faced complaints of domestic abuse or sexual offending over the past decade. But we move on, Camilla, to the latest news, which is in the Times and, in fact, the front page too of the Daily Telegraph. Mass walkouts by teachers, now a prospect. Suggestion is it will hit millions of pupils. No one quite knows how this will work, I guess, and whether enforced school closures will happen, but we wait to see.
Yes, that's right. This is today, late afternoon, we had the news that the National Education Union, which is the biggest union in the UK for teachers, met the threshold and voted in favour of strike action. So that could potentially see school closures. The leaders of the union I was speaking to earlier today said that in schools where they've only got a few union members, they could probably stay open. But in a school where the majority of teachers are members of the NEU, that would most probably lead to the school having to close. And we actually saw the Department for Education has released its guidance for schools on how to try and keep the show on the road during these strikes. And they're saying it may be necessary to switch to remote learning. Schools might want to think about bringing in volunteers, also prioritising vulnerable children and those studying for their GCSEs and A-levels. If they do have to pick and choose which children are able to be in school, obviously this is going to be a complete nightmare for working parents who will potentially have to take the day off work so they can look after their children.
Yes, I take the view it's rather more significant for parents than pupils in some respect, I have to say. But we will see whether they'll cope with the laptops and volunteers to help schools hit by strikes, as the Daily Telegraph suggests is on offer for young people, Pippa.
Well, that should do it. I mean, bottom line is it is disruptive for parents. I think I think many of them who have children at exam stage will be particularly concerned. I'm sure my children won't suffer too much not being at that stage, having a couple of days off school. And it's yes, it's disruptive, but also teachers aren't striking for the sake of it. And I think that what they would say, what the unions would say, is that that this is really a last resort, that it's really reached a point where because of pay and crucially because of retention, they don't see any other course of action. Now, as you will, as many of your viewers will know, retention is a massive issue facing the teaching profession, which any of us that have kids at school or friends who are teachers know that how hard the vast majority of teachers work way beyond their hours, and that they don't necessarily get a huge amount of financial they don't get a huge amount financially from it. Most of them seem to do it for the love of the job, and they are obviously key to public service. And if you think that Rishi Sunak, for example, has plans to expand maths teaching all the way up to 18 for children, well, that is going to require the retention or indeed the recruitment of maths teachers, which have fallen since 2010. So, there are serious issues facing the profession, that this is ultimately what this is about. And, whether children miss a day or two here or there, what it comes down to really, I think, is more sort of like a long-term sustainable future for teaching. And, we're going to be in quite a situation if there aren't enough teachers to fill those vacancies. Obviously, it's also about pay. Teachers, like other parts of the public sector, have had below inflation pay rises and overall real terms pay cuts for several years. And clearly, cost of living crisis is hitting teachers just as it is hitting anybody else. But it does feel, doesn't it, that this is part of this sort of rolling programme of strikes that we've seen first across transport, which is near resolution. Then we want to nurses and health. Nurses today have said that they're going to issue some more strike dates, and much more widespread strike dates. Unless they manage to reach a resolution with the government before the end of January. And now we have teachers. This strikes issue and the resolution of them, despite Rishi Sunak's apparent attempts to talk with the unions, isn't there yet. And I think that ongoing disruption, not just schools but across the public sector, public services that are provided, is going to continue, and that's damaging for the government.
Yes, and the suggestion is that the National Education Union may well have a meeting with government on Wednesday, but yet another union, Camilla, talking about 13 years of underfunding, effectively doing Sir Keir Starmer's job for him. And what does this mean as we roll forward towards the next election? Rishi Sunak, a furlough long forgotten, does not want to be the PM with the reputation for bringing public services to their knees. So what does he do about it?
Yes, absolutely. The longer these strikes go on and the more public sector unions they impact on, the weaker it looks for the government, quite frankly. If it's a government that can't keep schools open, can't keep the transport network working, can't keep the postal network working, can't essentially operate basic public services under its watch, then that's not a particularly good look for Rishi Sunak. And it's interesting with strikes because it's actually an area where we see quite a key divergence between the Tories and the Labour Party. Conservatives are wanting to, or are today, bringing in these tougher strike laws, whereas Labour are talking about repealing the 2016 Trade Union Act. And that they're saying they don't support the government's stance on the new strike laws it's bringing in. Of course, whether if they're in power, Labour would be able to avert these strikes is sort of hypothetical at this stage. But the fact that the Conservatives are in Downing Street and are unable to prevent these months now of rolling public sector strikes is not a good look, and not something that goes down particularly well with voters either.
Yes, and we saw that majority of 60 for the government in that second reading vote result on their strikes minimum service levels bill. Moves on to the committee stage, we are told. So lots more of that, obviously, in the days to come. Lots more in our programme too. The UK government blocks Scotland's gender recognition bill in a first since devolution. We'll discuss that next. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, Pippa Crerar and Camilla Turner. Welcome back to both of you. To The Guardian, Pippa, if you don't mind, your paper. Apologies because you're Scottish. I've picked you to do this one. This is the fact that the UK government has blocked a law made in Scotland on gender recognition, but it's the first time since devolution that they've stepped in this way.
Yeah, this is part of the Scotland Act, which was obviously the act under which devolution happened. And Section 35 order is kind of the nuclear option that the Scottish secretaries decided to take. And it's because the Scottish government, the Scottish Parliament, and it's backed by all the parties apart from the Tories, passed legislation to make Scotland the first part of the UK to introduce a self-identification system for transgender people who wanted to change gender. And what the UK government is saying is that this would have an adverse impact on UK legislation, the Equality Act, as it's imposed across the rest of the UK, and that they have a responsibility to protect the devolution settlement. So they're basically saying this is all about the constitutional impact of it. But what Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish government are saying, two things. One is that this is actually a slippery slope to them undermining the democratic will of the Scottish Parliament, which voted by majority to bring this legislation in. And two, that it's an attack on trans people, and that the UK government is attempting to make this a sort of another step in the culture war. And there's definitely an element of that in all of this. But this row is going to continue, I think, for some time in Parliament tomorrow and then beyond.
Yeah, we'll see what happens next, certainly on that one. In the meantime, Jeremy Clarkson, a full public apology to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, or specifically the Duchess, I suppose, which has, it seems, been somewhat rejected by them, Camilla.
Yes, that's right. We had Jeremy Clarkson today issuing yet another apology to Harry and Meghan, and revealing that he'd actually emailed them both on Christmas Day to tell them personally how sorry he was for this column and how sort of mortified he was at the amount of offence it had caused. But Harry and Meghan are saying that this doesn't cut it. They're not interested. Sort of rejecting his apology. And we also learned today it was reported that Amazon are likely to be dropping Jeremy Clarkson when his current contract comes to an end. So it's not good news for him. It seems all his apologies have sort of fallen on deaf ears. And it looks like it's going to be quite difficult potentially for him to recover from all of this.
Yes, he claimed he wrote it in a rush and didn't realise he'd completely messed up until reading the paper. But their statement says it is clear that this is not an isolated incident shared in haste, but rather a series of articles shared in hate. So quite a put down from them to him. Both of you, thank you both very much indeed. Camilla Turner there and Pippa Crerar. We will see you later. Thank you very much indeed. Let's